So it's my great pleasure to welcome Ratish Nanda here today. Ratish is a conservation architect and CEO for the Aga Khan Trust for Culture in India. He heads the multidisciplinary AKTC teams that are currently undertaking two major award-winning urban conservation projects: Nizamuddin Urban Renewal Initiative in Delhi and the Qutb Shahi Heritage Conservation Park in Hyderabad. This is truly inspiring work that has been recognized internationally, not only in terms of AKT's remarkable research, site conservation and management, but in its commitment to social uplift and community engagement. AKTC's projects and its leadership was one of the main reasons that I chose to do fieldwork in India. Ratish received his MA in Historic Building Conservation from the Institute of Advanced Architecture at the University of York, and later worked with Historic Scotland before returning to India. He joined AKTC in 1999, starting with his pioneering work at Humayun's tomb in Delhi, now, of course, a World Heritage Site, before leading a 5-year restoration project, which was Babur's Garden in Kabul, Afghanistan. Those of you who have had the pleasure of meeting Ratish over this week will know him to be an extremely modest person in terms of his major contributions and many accolades. I just want to quote here from one of his latest awards, just in the last couple of months. It recognized his achievements, and I quote, "creating historical sites as public spaces for the contemporary city, and his enduring engagement with the historic spirit and relevance of those sites. His ability to work with multiple teams and stakeholders, constantly navigating complexities and contestations while spearheading projects under the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, is a less spoken about aspect. These project outcomes display a remarkable tenacity on his part, especially in upholding and in ensuring that the ideals behind the conservation and revitalization programs come to fruition," unquote. We are very fortunate to have Ratish with us at Penn, so please make him feel welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure. And also, comes at the end of several years of interaction and discussion. So much look forward to speaking with all of you today. I have a lot of pictures and we will hopefully still have some time at the end of it. But as Lynn explained, we at the Aga Khan Trust for Culture have been, over the last 25 years, been working in two different sites in Delhi and Hyderabad. And what I will do today, if this works, where do I need to point it? I have to point it somewhere, I think up there. So, the Aga Khan Trust for Culture is really part of the Aga Khan Development Network. And these are a series of, or multiple agencies created by His Highness the Aga Khan over the last 50, 60 years, and with diverse mandates. But what binds us all together is the determination to improve quality of life. At the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, we leverage cultural assets, whether it's heritage sites, historic cities, museums, intangible heritage of music, craft, and food, to achieve those objectives that other agencies might do through building health and education infrastructure, for example. Now, our work in India really started in 1997, coincidentally at the back of that report, which put a value to India's heritage. And as you can read, it basically said what we're doing is looking at heritage in our country as a burden rather than the obvious economic asset that it is. Our first engagement in India was really the Humayun's tomb garden restoration. This site was designated in 1993. And one of the ICOMOS recommendations was that the gardens of the site must be revived. And And towards that, the Archaeological Survey of India approached us. What led to a very fulfilling 5-6 year project where we were able to understand the garden. And these are some of the archaeological discoveries which are very early on, show fountain mechanisms predating Mughal garden history. I mean, it was believed that the fountains were really introduced in the 17th century. Here it was in the early 16th century. So what followed was really 5 years of work towards replanting the garden with species that were once planted here, to restore garden levels to what they would have been, and finally, ultimately, the bottom pictures, restoring, reviving flowing water. What this did was almost immediately had 1,000% increase in visitor numbers. And what we invested in the garden restoration has been recovered year after year after year for 25 plus years now, every year. This is the perfect charbagh, for those of you familiar with Persian garden landscape designs. And it is, in saying so, it is the earliest surviving perfect charbagh anywhere in the world. So this garden is almost as important as the monument that sits within it. These are two pictures that anyone who's ever seen my presentation would have seen, because they really capture the essence of what we did in terms of planting, repairing structures, and reviving flowing water to this 26-acre World Heritage Site. Several years later, we came back. We were invited back to India by the then Prime Minister, requesting further public-private partnership in the field of culture. And several sites were offered to us from across India, several grand sites. We chose to come back here to Humayun's tomb because A, we thought the work was unfinished. B, there was a potential, and this is the most significant part, there was a potential to use the conservation effort to lead to a significant improvement in quality of life for the local inhabitants who have been connected to this heritage for 7 centuries. And as you can see, this is a painting by my friend Himanish Das, which shows how this area would have been in the 19th century. And today it remains one of the most densest ensemble of medieval Islamic buildings anywhere in the country. The project area really comprises of 3 distinct sites, which have been presently segregated, and we've tried to integrate these once again as they would have been. This is the Humayun's Tomb ensemble, which is about 100 acres, includes several significant monuments, not only Humayun's Tomb. These are all garden tombs, all built in the 16th, 17th centuries. This is the city park that we have since created. This was just north of the World Heritage Site, part of the same cultural landscape, but had been used as a construction rubber dumping ground for about a couple of decades before we got involved, and was not open to the public. And finally, the densely populated Nizamuddin Basti. About 20,000 people live here, making it one of the most densely populated settlements anywhere in India, and that's saying a lot. And it stands, all of these stand next to each other, but all of them are owned by different or managed by different government agencies, and not seen as sort of one space. So to do this project, we needed to get all of these government agencies together. Now, these are agencies with very different mandates. The Archaeological Survey of India is, of course, responsible for protecting national monuments. The Municipal Corporation of Delhi to provide, just like any municipality, infrastructure, education, health, sanitation, road, water supply. And the Central Public Works Department owned 67 acres of land, which was then the Sundar Nursery. So on hindsight, one of the smartest thing we did was get all of these agencies who would otherwise never talk to each other to sign a single piece of paper. And that took us about a year or more before we could start the project, but it was, on hindsight, absolutely critical, even though back then it was very frustrating because the Archaeological Survey of India was ready to play ball immediately. Some of the others joined the bandwagon almost 2 years later. Now, building on the World Bank report, that is the guidance from, one of the many guidance from His Highness the Aga Khan on why the Aga Khan Trust for Culture was established in the 1970s, why we do what we do. And that is this improving quality of life is the center of what we do. And it's not only for local communities, but it's also for international visitors, the wider Delhi public, and also maybe sometimes the Gurgaon public. Yeah. And that, over the years, has allowed us or enabled us to fulfill 15 of the 17 SDGs through a conservation project. Now, this is what we set out to do, and this is what we have since managed to do. Demonstrating, and in India, you need to demonstrate that even today. All of India protects less than 10,000 historic buildings with any sort of protection. And that's probably 1/3 of what New York City protects. So in India, we still need to make a case for conservation. We still need to say, why are we conserving? Why are we investing meager funds? And in this case, it's all privately funded. There has been no government funding. It's all funding that comes from us or is raised. But even then, we need to make a case for conservation in the 21st century. And a lot of our work aims to do exactly that, is to demonstrate conservation projects and how they can fulfill significant government agenda. What I'm going to do is, we've done 60 monuments, and I'm not going to show you each one of them, but I do want to emphasize the actual challenges in the built heritage conservation that we've had over the last years. Now, as I said, this is a site that has really developed from the late 13th, early 14th century, and all the way till the late 19th, early 20th century. And each building, each of the 60 monuments that we have worked on, have presented us with different challenges. Their significance is different, and hence the conservation approach has varied from building to building. So over here, I'm going to show you 5 different sort of approaches. And this was Humayun's tomb. It was the first ever privately undertaken conservation project in India. And sadly, 25 years after we started, we remain the only private agency to have worked on any national monument in the whole country. The liberalization that several sectors in India, whether infrastructure, healthcare, whatever, has seen, has not yet touched the culture sector. So at Humayun's tomb, we had funding from the Tata Trusts, and we really had to work from head to toe, from the top to the bottom, not because Humayun's tomb was in any danger of collapsing, but because over the last 200 years, alterations and neglect had led to the building not being seen as the original builders had intended it to be. And because we were very conscious that this is the first ever private initiative in any sort of national monument, we were very of actually establishing a conservation process and fulfilling it to the end. So exhaustive archival research. We were fortunate that we'd spent time working on the Humayun's Tomb Garden earlier, so we had access to a lot of this information. We introduced 3D laser scanning as a tool for documentation of historic buildings. Every stone in the whole building was mapped, every stone. And then multiple peer reviews were done. You can see in that picture, there should be the Great Herb Stowell. So multiple peer reviews, national and international, were done to do this. Exhaustive architectural documentation. And then finally, this was absolutely key. What we realized very early on is that if conservation needed to be successful in India, we needed to go back to the craft-based approach. We needed to ensure that the craftsman is really king. And in that process, there were a lot of building crafts that had since been lost that we needed to revive. On the top left corner is the mother of pearl inlay, which needed to be revived. There is tile work, these are crafts that had been lost to India. But over the years, our craftsmen have clocked almost 1.5 million man days of work and constitute a significant portion of the expense we have incurred on the project. And this is all going into craftsman wages. It fulfills every government agenda. And then, of course, it's not only craftsmen, it's also coupled with significant scientific research across and international analysis and so on. A lot of these materials were sent out of the country to be analyzed. Top left picture is really revealing gold and turquoise painting below 20th century layer of cement. And this had to be done very carefully. But, as I said, 1.5 million man days. The Humayun tomb plinth was covered with cement, and since the 1950s. Very important architectural element, very important element of the building. And we had to not only remove the cement, but 4,000 square meters of stone paving had to be lifted. And some of these blocks required about 15 men to really lift them. There was no possibility of getting heavy equipment in here. And again, 100% of this work is goes into craftsman wages. Now, over the years, a lot of the stone blocks, huge stone blocks of quartzite, which can't be quarried anymore, were cannibalized, were taken from here to other sites because they were simply not visible. And fortunately, what happened is we had this 2010 Commonwealth Games where the whole of Delhi was being spruced up. In the process, the municipality was removing stone curbstones from across the city and replacing them with concrete curbstones. So we were able to buy 70 truckloads of stone just to put back where it was missing. It was one of those once in a lifetime opportunities. Otherwise, we would simply not have had the stone. And this was very interesting. This was the picture. I don't know whether it's clear, but the Humayun tomb was a family graveyard, and a lot of this is covered with 20th century cement. Once we started removing the cement, I don't know whether the slide is clear, but we started discovering patterns in stucco, in plaster, and then to restore the patterns. Now, till then, this was fine. This is the penultimate, on the right picture, you see the penultimate layer. And then we had to do this. And all hell broke loose in Delhi because all of a sudden this monument was looking new. But this was an outcome of a peer review exercise where Professor A.G. came in and said, you have to put the white back. And I was like, oh God, all these people will be on my heels. But this is why. Because really, to understand the significance of the site, it is basically not the Taj Mahal. It is the precursor of the Taj Mahal. But you can't look at Humayun's tomb from a 2 millimeter distance like you can for the Taj. This is the red and white contrast. And these are the cells where we had to remove these black, gray colors of cement and put back that whole red and white contrast. Very important element. But in a context where there is little or no public discussion, this was really hell broke loose in Delhi. And but very, very happy that we did this. And we had to remove something like 200,000 square feet of cement to put back lime plaster in one building. The other key sort of conservation decision was these tiles. This is on the left is a 19th century image. And you see the little specks of blue and really stand out. It's always stood out to me. And when we did start looking at the building, we were able to decipher the patterns of this blue. And this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We proposed that we are going to do this. There was a UNESCO workshop with 40 people from 10 countries who descended on us for a very stimulating discussion for about a week. And we really worked out a conservation philosophy for tile work, which meant that any existing tile even when the glaze has been lost, like all of that, would be retained. And only where the tiles had been replaced with cement would the glaze be put back. So, so this is what the tiles look like. To many people, they're like, why don't, it doesn't, these tiles have fallen away. They haven't. We've just left every 500-year-old tile in place because it's really valuable. And this, I think, marked a new point in tile restoration for Central Asia, where there is a lot of it. This was another big disaster. The finial collapsed. It's an incredible, and every disaster is an opportunity. So we were fortunate that we had done a 3D laser scan of this incredible piece of ornamentation. And a lot, when this building was being built in the 16th century, the Mughals were very keen to integrate themselves with India, contrary to what is now popularly believed and the story that is now popularly told. And this would be really inspired by Hindu temple or a Sikh temple. But 18 feet tall, copper and gold. And this thing was on the ground. My boss said, who I have great respect for, saying, don't touch it. Nobody in the world can fix this anymore. But as an ode to Indian craftsmanship, it took us 2 years, but we could fix it. But in the meanwhile, we got a donor, Titan Watches, to give us 8 kilos of pure gold and put that back. Bill, that's the picture I didn't want to show. No health and safety there. But critically, this when we got engaged with this donor, who would have thought somebody would be willing to give you 8 kilos of gold? We had made the copper finial and we sent it for the gilding, and the donor came back and saying, this won't work because it is only 99.2% pure copper. We need 99.6% pure copper, otherwise gold will not stick. And I was like, to hell with all of you. This is not something we want to do again. But we had to specially manufacture copper sheets of 99.6% purity. It's not made. So back then in the 16th century, they got copper of that purity that is today not commercially available. And so this was a great story, great project, one of the 200 plus projects that makes this one project. And we built a museum on the site which will be the final resting place for the original finial. Now, this is not only copper and gold, it's got some incredible engraving. So there are inscriptions, there is, so very, very happy that this is going to be secured in perpetuity, not exposed to the climate, and people will be able to look at it, hopefully not touch it, but at least look at it. Now, what this has done, which is something we are, very, very proud of, or which we work very steadfastly towards, that for the last 100 years, conservation in India has been dictated by the then Director General of 1926, who was really concerned about funds being limited and said only preservation. So all of India, and those people who are familiar with India, we're only trying to do preservation, even though in many cases our monuments have been really altered with 21st century materials. And from there to the ICOMOS recommendation in 2016, allowing a World Heritage expansion, is sort of trying to convince the country that preservation is, like the Bara Charter says, only a valid approach where no other approach is possible. Some more conservation. This is a 14th century step well, very, very sacred. And bottom left, you will see it partially collapsed. And there are about 4 million people passing on top every day. And if you come here, this is collapsed. Very sacred. So what happened at the turn of the last century, there were hundreds of such step wells in Delhi. Now about a dozen survive. And the usual approach when something like that happens is to fill it up with earth, even though it's sacred. And to avoid that, we engaged with the community for over a year. Notice 80 people are living atop it. And literally no toilets, no nothing. They just, you can imagine what they're doing with their waste. And this water is considered sacred. So after a year, the community challenged us. They said, we will let you fix it, provided you can clean it up. And, in our enthusiasm, yeah, of course we'll clean it up, without realizing that it had been tried in the past and every machine had failed. This is like 40 feet of sludge that we needed to remove with buckets like this. So this itself was 8,000 man-days of work to just remove sludge, accumulated sludge over centuries. And then we needed to build alternate housing for the 80 people who were living atop it. And this is an urban conservation project that carried on for over a decade. Because once we'd done this, this man came to us, who is the head of the priests over there, the head priest, so to speak, the Sajjada Nashin, said, my grandfather broke down portions of this building. I've seen what you've done. I'm willing to move my house back if you can restore the arcade. So we restored the arcade. He moved his house back 6 feet, literally had to demolish it and rebuild it. But I don't know whether this was worth the money. I don't know whether this was worth all the money that was put into to move this back, reconstruct the arcade. But it was really coming from the community. It was somebody saying, I know this is something 70 years ago we did wrong, and we would be grateful if you fix this. Similarly, incredible monument, incredible monument. White marble, late 16th, early 17th century. And top left picture, it was to protect the monument from evil people such as ourselves. It was locked up behind this big wall, and nobody could see it. And so we had to knock down the wall, integrate it within the cultural landscape. And this can only be done in India. We got German funding for this, and we had to dismantle this whole building because in the 17th century, it was really built and stone blocks tied together with iron bars. And each of them, the water had used each of them expanded, and every stone block had a cement with it. So we had to dismantle 25 domes like this and put stone indents in every stone and really rebuild the monument over a 4-year period. And then create a performance space, which we've done over the years, many international festivals at. Finally, coming to the epicenter of it all, this is the shrine around which these 100 buildings have been built over the last, from 14th to the 19th century. And notice the red paint, the silver paint on this mosque. By the way, this mosque is not protected by law for heritage. It's the early 14th century. So it's in the possession of the community, it's in the possession of the people. And very soon after we finished Humayun's tomb conservation, it was incredible. I couldn't believe my ears. And if all of you, I'm sure we'll have a lot of community questions, and if all of you would have asked me 10 years ago saying, what is your buy-in with the community, I would have stumbled for answers. But we, over the last 5 years, have been given responsibility by the community to peel off all these 20th century paint layers, reveal all of this incredible 14th century work, replace a lot of the stones that had been damaged. This has been covered with cement only because some of the stone was damaged. And because it's a living mosque, portions broken down were considered inappropriate. And so the easiest thing would be to just cover it with cement. And so this is what it was, and that's what it's become. Back to this is still unfinished. There are 2 pieces of stone we still need to fix, which we're trying to figure out how to do it, because the whole weight on is sandstone fixed inappropriately 700 years ago. And we're trying to figure it out. And a lot of conservation. This is again Rahim's tomb. That is in the crypt. So it was a miracle that this building was still standing. I mean, you could put your whole arm into those cracks, and covered with paint layers and soot. So this was the main. Rahim is an iconic figure. He was the commander-in-chief of the Mughal Emperor Akbar, but he was also a great poet. Even today, every student in school reads his poetry, the Dohas. And yet nobody knew his tomb was so prominently located. He's even an Hindutva icon, not only a Muslim icon. And so stone by stone, we had to And this tomb had been cannibalized. It had been ripped open over the years, removed stone. And that drawing really shows the new intervention, the new stone that was really added. And this is what became of the facade. Where we had no evidence, it was not put back. The gardens originally were 10 times this size, but now is a built-up area. This is the only bit we could restore. But most significantly, we held festivals, publications, 2 major publications on the life of this man. So one of the few opportunities which we had to link the tangible and intangible heritage associated with one man or one building. He had built this building for his wife. And also illumination. It's amazing. All of a sudden, everybody knows where Rahim's tomb is in Delhi. And till 2 years ago, it was bang on the main road, 2 major transport arteries, and nobody noticed. Nobody noticed. I'm sorry, this is too much conservation. I'm going to stop now. But Neela Gumbad, 1530s, 16th century, occupied like this. And to tell you of 8 years of work in 2 slides, restored to this. And the linkage with Humayun's tomb was restored. And this building is today part of the World Heritage Site, expanded World Heritage Site in 2016. More conservation, landscape setting, restoring the ceiling. This was all lost. This is 70% new. But our craftsmen can easily match the work of their forefathers using the same materials. And we had enough evidence to go for it because these are all geometric patterns. This was a major reconstruction. Again, going back, this is not about fixing a monument. This is about changing the way conservation heritage is looked at in India. This is a national monument where you have cement slapped on it to hold the walls together. This is what was considered conservation in India till 15 years ago. This is what it now looks like. And fortunately, we had all the UNESCO awards and appreciation and all of that. So, even though people have been saying this is not the right approach, but all of these sites since conservation have been including, now, I mind you, I said the Central Public Works Department owned 67 acres of land for Sundar Nursery. Today, Sundar Nursery is 90 acres. One of the big things we did was remove 23 acres of encroachments and restore these monuments to the public domain, to public access. More before and after pictures. Another interesting building, traffic roundabout, 1530s, and called the Subs Burj. And once we started looking at it and removing the cement, look at the intricate craftsmanship across plaster, across tile work inlaid in plaster, never seen before. And finally, turquoise and gold painting on the ceiling. Makes my hair stand on edge. But this is now the earliest surviving painted ceiling anywhere in the Islamic world. And we now believe, because of the intensity of craftsmanship, that this was a building built by the Emperor Humayun for his mother's mausoleum. Otherwise, we don't know. So that because of the richness in this building. And because we discovered this, and because we noticed, we were able to convince that 50% of the painting had been lost because of water penetration, we were able to remove the 1980 tiles on the dome and replace them with really authentic material as they would have. In the 1980s, all of these tiles were removed and terracotta tiles were placed here. Now, these are back to things. And this is a proud moment for any conservator. We were able to minor boundary modification. For those of you who want to know how we did it, talk to me later. But from 26 acres to 200 acres, the World Heritage Site expanded in one go under a minor boundary modification to include all of this. For us in India, this is not only about tourism. This is about securing the World Heritage Site and securing this heritage in perpetuity. So that's the end of my conservation story. I would have loved to show you another 50 monuments, but I didn't want to be stoned. This is the hub of culture. This is where the Qawwali music was really born 700 years ago. This is where incredible and unique intangible heritage still exists. And we have very proudly and very happily been able to leverage some of this to not only fulfill the sustainable development goals, but also to improve quality of life. And it all started here in 2008, my colleague then Tara Sharma doing a cultural mapping led by the local youth, many of whom then became, over the years, heritage guides and have walked through about 50,000 kids through this place. And in today's time and age, it's so important for these kids interpreting their own heritage for the sake of the rest of the city. And we mapped oral history. A lot of these people we interviewed and documented are no longer alive. We created performance areas this is a Qawwali music tradition which is born here. It's a very important Indian musical genre. We found that less than 1% of the women in the community had any sort of economic opportunities, 1%, and they were mostly domestic workers. So over the years, they've been creating products such as these, and last year the group made a revenue of over $100,000 American dollars, which in India is a lot of money. These are women who've never earned a penny in their lives. Other crafts also revived and using motifs from the monuments here. And then the spirit of entrepreneurship. So we're trying to, and then this is a group one is incredibly proud of. We realized that about 70% of the children in Nizamuddin were malnourished. Heart of Delhi, 70% kids malnourished. So we set up this group to provide healthy snacks and subsidized food. And these women started churning out these incredible dishes for us. And now they have their own food truck, have been flown across the country to be guest chefs at 5-star hotels. Women who'd never stepped out of their village settlement. So they have a food truck now, which and then craft. So we every year for 10 years organized a mela, a fair, where Nizamuddin put its best foot forward, and we would on an average get about 15,000-20,000 people over a 3-day period experiencing the built heritage, the living heritage, the music, the food, and so on. And then urban improvements. I mean, when you're really talking about heritage in India, you cannot talk about what our past was. We need to understand what's happening, and our big urban problems are there. And in a historic area like ours, which has been ignored, we had to start with laying the sewer lines. Usually not the kind of stuff we do anywhere in the world. We don't do this sort of infrastructure. But over here, it was a necessity because this was leaking into the Bauli, which is why the Bauli collapsed, the stepwell collapsed. So not only did we measure every manhole, we relayed the sewer lines, we redid the streets, and streets are improved, streets are retarred every year, and so this was done about 12 years ago, and now all of a sudden the political leadership wants to redo it because you spend money, you earn money, etc., etc. We realized that less than 1% of the local community went to parks. 1%. So after several years of effort, we were given permission to landscape neighborhood parks, and there were 5 of them, for community use. And then there was this big space. This was because of the 2010 games and the new road infrastructure. This had become the picture on the right. You can see this had become really the facade of the settlement. And it took us about 5 years of work, and every member of the team was engaged in this because there were multiple teams engaged in this work to really take it from there to there, and the painting was the last 1% of the work. But we had to build 250 toilets inside people's homes. We had to build a sewer infrastructure. We had to stop them from throwing their garbage across, establish a waste management, waste collection system that you see in that picture, which is now sustainable and the community pays for it, and get the children involved. These are little children games that they're playing on top, and everybody involved to really fix this urban space. Community toilets, again, 4 million annual visitors. This was the state of the community toilet. This is what it now looks like. And finally, in in 1992, there was a new law introduced which prohibited building within 100 meters of protected monuments. And for 300 meters, you needed bylaws. So we actually wrote out the bylaws. We kept saying this 100-meter prohibited doesn't work. It should be really the 100-meter zone should be the intense conservation zone, but that's another fight. And then we were able to designate an archaeological park. So 900 acres of land, almost the size of Central Park, is today a new archaeological park, designated archaeological park, with Humayun's tomb at its southern edge. Education, we did not start in Nizamuddin with conservation. This was the first intervention we did, wherein we created the school, which had any given time 600 kids, and introduced art and education and computers, which these kids would never have access to. So every kid was going, this is primary school. We had to redo this was a big building which was built, but only one floor was usable because of the damage. We renovated the whole school. This is a US micro scholarship English training program. 700 kids from 17 different schools we put through this school. So the US government pays 50% of the fees, and 30 of these kids have since come to American community colleges, which is a big deal for these things. Also madrasas. Madrasas are traditional places of learning for Muslims, and usually only madrasas only teach you the Quran and whatever. And we were able to eventually include English, mathematics, and computers in the several madrasas that are found in Nizamuddin Basti. And finally, vocational training towards economic opportunities. And this is not only building craft, this was aspirational. So computer hardware, software, crafts, and all of that. Health. Now we found that this was amazing. There were women dying in childbirth, and not one, not two, but quite common. Over the years, we created a health program for the local community of 20,000 people. And we've had 750,000 individuals access the polyclinic and the specialist doctors we placed here for 15 years. 750,000. And these women played a stellar role during COVID. First year of COVID, not one case within the community, because they were able to go house to house, distribute masks, soaps, and basically teaching. So the first 1 year, there was no COVID in Nizamuddin. Which was a phenomenal achievement. And then today, and when we've sort of wrapped up the social economic project, we've achieved what we set out to achieve. We've created a local association who will take forward this project. And the project is now run 100% by not all those women. Those were women who were part of the project at any given one time. But so the work that is required to be done will carry on in perpetuity, hopefully. This is very, very ambitious. If this succeeds, it will be incredible. But this is really handing over a project to 100% to the community representatives. And we got all of those recognitions, which we are very grateful for. And finally, environment and ecology. If this was from the nursery, as you can see, dumping ground. Professor Muhammad Shahir was the landscape architect who created a master plan. And we've been building green spaces across the world. And that is really fulfilled here. It's the only place in Delhi where our visitors come both in Rolls Royces and in public transport, the e-rickshaws. So it's incredible that we've had to remove some 22,000 square meters of road network to really revive the historic character of this garden. But in the process, using the same craft techniques that we were used for the conservation work, but also to, these are just some before views of how the park looked like. those are really stone blocks that we brought from afar to create a microhabitat zone. That's what it now looks like. This is the same space as that. That's what happens if you invest time in 10, 15 years in a single site. We've had 20,000 plus trees planted here and of 300 native species. So it's Delhi's biggest arboretum. We now have 118 bird species, where you wouldn't see a single bird till 15 years ago. Again, some before and after views of what it's become. There was only eucalyptus at the edge. And we continue to do a lot of environmental awareness with birds, flowers, bees, and so on. Now, coming to my last bit of the Delhi presentation, we get 1 million visitors to Sundar Nursery this year. We get 2 million visitors to Humayun's tomb, and we get 4 million pilgrims to Nizamuddin Basti. The 7 million people are congregating in this area. 7 million visitors are congregating in this area every year. And in order to put it in the cultural context, we're building a site museum, which is underground. So the visual linkages between different monuments are not going to be affected. It will include, it's because it's an interpretation center to really start with. It would include a lot of digital media. We've got about 300 artifacts from the National Museum and the Archaeological Survey of India collections, and really, putting it in the cultural context. So, who was Emperor Humayun? This has required 5 years of primary research on this man, who's so far believed to have stumbled in and out of life. But we now know so much more about him, and there is a new the museum publication is already printed and out, called The Planetary King by Professor Aga Khan. But gardens, architecture, and the iconic personalities of this zone, of which there were many. So these are some views of what the museum eventually will look like. And again, there has been a lot of community engagement towards defining the themes of the museum. And because there is one gallery devoted only to Sufism, and these are the keepers of the shrine and their heritage. Now, if you have 5 more minutes, may I run through this? This is another mega project that His Highness the Aga Khan supported in the city of Hyderabad, and 100 monuments on one site, 4 of which are on the scale of Humayun's tomb. That is a view from 1900 something or the other. There would be a date somewhere. Anyway, 1971. This is what the site looks like when seen from Golconda. 1991, pretty much the same as 1971, and then 2011. So this is the urban context in which we're working. A lot of the site has been taken over by this urban sprawl. There are 100 monuments, as I said, of which there are several mausoleums. It's basically a necropolis of the Golconda, of the Qutb Shahi dynasty, who ruled from Golconda. And because it's 106 acres, Professor Shahi did a lot of landscape studies, prepared a landscape master plan that really creates a core archaeological zone with an ecological buffer on the north and south, and a facility zone on one side of it. But this is the joy. Wonderful material called cement used here in the 20th century. And you scrape it off, and we were able to discover repeatedly 16th century stucco work, a lot of which has been revealed and restored, really changing the way these buildings are seen. When I first went there, everybody said these are not the Mughals. There are no enclosed gardens. We found 5 enclosed gardens across the site, and you see the enclosure wall. The arcade has been reconstructed because this is a very important landscape design that the project has revealed this under. So the project over here really revealed a lot more about the Qutb Shahis than we knew a few years ago. Massive domes, as you can imagine, removing the cement, replastering in lime, and the final layer done within 2 days so that there are no joints. but that's what it requires. And again, the landscape. Again, very sad to have knocked down all these concrete bridges, because again, once we knocked that down, there was a hue and cry in Hyderabad, because apparently Lady Diana, the Princess Diana, had stood on that bridge once and been photographed. But it takes all kinds. But we were able to find some significant archaeological material here, and which really define our understanding of these people. And we had to design the landscape accordingly, because there were layers and layers of archaeology below it. And this was last year. This was brilliant. When we started this project, we were buying water to conserve 100 monuments, buying water in tankers. Not very sustainable, not very cheap. And so we set about restoring these step wells and reconstructing them where they had collapsed. And we've now reconstructed 6 step wells. We couldn't find 2, which had existed on the site at some point. So out of 8 that we knew were on the site, we've been able to put back 6. As a result, we have water surplus. So we now collect almost 20 million liters of rainwater every year, year after year. And with that, we've been able to put, we've regraded the earth to collect this water, and these are the catchment areas. And we've been able to plant 15,000 trees on the ecological buffer zone, which UNESCO recognized last year. I love this picture. It took us a lot of effort, but that is a great, and unfortunately it's become part of a car park or a bike park or whatever. But eventually we were able to force all of this out and restore the gardens. And finally, these few slides, removing cement has been standard for all 100 monuments. Removing 20th century cement layers has been a standard thing. And over here, we were revealed incredible glazed tiles. So, the Qutb Shahi is revealing themselves. And this was unexpected. And it's a joy, because there is enough evidence that we might be able to put this back. And finally, it's critical in projects like these to build partnerships. We've very aggressively been able to fundraise for it. So government grants, institutional grants, corporate grants, international grants have really, every penny counts, every drop counts, and that building that sense of partnership has been very critical to what we've done both in Delhi and Hyderabad over the last 15 odd years. This is again one of those pictures taken in the spur of the moment. These are the number of craftsmen we usually had at the site at any given one point. And then there are about 30 different professions on the team. So it's a very interdisciplinary approach, like the Aga Khan Trust for Culture projects worldwide. And thank you. Now I can do 200 slides in 47 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ratish. It's beyond impressive, the projects and the scope of work and the accomplishment and the thought behind it. One of the things I'm curious about, I'd like to ask you, is how much time went in before you ever touched a site? So that would be developing the relationships with people, understanding what the various relationships are within a community, because that's the piece that is often not accounted for in big conservation projects.
Sorry to disappoint you, but because we are an international organization, because we need all sorts of government permissions to really do this, there was absolutely no discussion with the community before we signed the agreement. The only discussion was with the community leadership, which we later realized was not usually trusted by the community itself. So all hell broke loose when the newspapers said, this project has been signed. And we had a municipal, we had a deputy commissioner of the municipality who had, before we signed, gone to the community and said, the Aga Khan Trust for Culture is going to be here. I'm going to create parks where there are buildings and build buildings where there are parks. So the parks were on the periphery. And he had this vision from the 1960s in America, building these vertical ghettos. And he expected us to do that. So that was the unfortunate context in which we started. And for the first year, I think many of us were just spending every evening in Nizamuddin Basti and just chatting to people, just trying to build that bridge. But what is key is that for every following years, that is the last 15 years, we would have had on an average of 100 to 150 community meetings every year without fail. And that is a conservative estimate. Even before, there was no survey, for example. And even before we surveyed every street, we did a community street meeting the night before. And just for that one thing. But for every aspect, there was a different community group. And as a result, we were really, and because we did lots of baseline surveys every 5 years, we reached out to almost 100% of the community. We were able to understand the community needs, aspirations, and then partner with them to fulfill those. But yeah, there is no shortcut to, we would have had 3,000-4,000 meetings over the years.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's very inspiring for a young professional like myself to hearing it. I want to ask about post-war heritage because they're now old enough and significant enough to be considered as a heritage as well. For example, Chandigarh and some Louis Khan's work in India. So I'm curious about what are some challenges, preservation challenges and conservation challenges you face for those projects. And another case in my head I was keep pondering was B.V. Doshi's Aranya low cost housing. Thank you.
So, we've not done any work on any of those settlements. There is Dr. Rohit Jigyasu sitting here, whom you might want to meet later. But critically, the problem with conservation is that it's seen as a burden in India. It's seen as a responsibility. And for 100 years, there has been no significant addition to the list of protected heritage buildings at national or state level. So what we're trying to do here is really demonstrate how conservation can fulfill a lot of government objectives, how conservation or heritage is an economic asset. And eventually that's probably going to peter out in 30 years from now or something and make people realize that heritage does not, right now the Indian law is heritage is anything more than 100 years old. There have been heritage buildings and so on listed by INTACH, but very little in terms of real protection or real intervention. A lot of modern architecture, in fact, has already been lost without any documentation. But what this is, I think what we're trying to show, and it's been worth all the effort and the misery and all of that, because it will eventually lead to multiple objectives being fulfilled. Soumya.
This was an astounding example of how focus in one location, I'm talking about the Nizamuddin Basti specifically, with whatever else might have triggered the project overall, to see success in all, so many of the SDGs, it is quite remarkable. So I just have, I have usually been working at the border of learning from heritage and incorporating into current development. So a lot of that work of mine has been to do with using craftsmen like that you mentioned, who were brought in and used to restore. So a couple of observations. I mean, this is, of course, fantastic, and it takes a lot of focus and leadership and collaboration like you have already demonstrated. So I just had a couple of observations. First is, what were the spin-offs of training? I think you brought in craftsmen from Central Asia also, didn't you? So what were the spin-offs in the local market, building construction trades, of having brought in this kind of expertise, which is very difficult to find in general construction? Because one thing I noticed is the school that you built was a very regular building, the very first school.
No, we didn't build it. We renovated it.
Oh, okay,
So
you
it's
renovated.
school.
So, okay, so I was just wondering whether there are any spin-offs on that front. And the second question was that when you extended the sewer lines in the Basti, there is this possibility of decentralized infrastructure, especially decentralized or fragmented but connected green infrastructure that could potentially be used in dense areas, including slums. I think the Bastis, according to the MCD, might have originally been designated as a slum condition.
No
based on
designation.
no designation, meaning based on the UN 5 deprivations of a
Yeah,
slum.
but this is an area which has had no designation.
Oh, okay. Unrecognized settlement. So, after having, I think it's a really fantastic project. I just wanted to think about these two aspects.
Yeah, I think critically, in training local youth to revive the building craft of tile making, we were really trying to create a market for conservation, which has been done. And there is a lot of effort in, and we did it for this 8 square meter canopies at Humayun's tomb. If I'd known that it would be such, it took us 20,000 samples to get the blue right, 20,000. And if we'd known that it would be such a challenge, we'd probably have said, forget it. But very glad in hindsight we did it. We've used the same, we continue to use the same skills, and including in the last building in Hyderabad. I think there is a lot of demand for this from the conservation world. But for the major commercial world, there are tiles being made, machine made, and so on. Those are being sold in terms of sewerage, there was a planned sewerage treatment plant at the edge of Nizamuddin, but somehow over the last few years, that plot has been given over for some other use. But that was the intention, to treat it locally.
We've got 2 questions from the chat, if that's okay. So I'm not sure if you can see them here. The first one is, I'm interested to know from the 100 monuments at, excuse my pronunciation, Qutb Shahi tombs, how many are fully restored?
Yes, almost all of them. Almost all of them are, I think we're nearing completion at the Qutb Shahi tombs. We've got about 10 odd buildings left, but we're also trying to build a museum on that site. So we will be in site for the foreseeable future, but we've also expanded into other sites in Hyderabad, so which carries on. And the second question is from my friend James, whom I was supposed to see last week in Canada, but I didn't get my visa. So thank you, James, for tuning into this. It was not, no, for a lot of the traditional skills, we did not need to start from scratch. A lot of the building crafts, the stone carving, the lime stucco, the woodwork, the metallurgy, what we call for the copper, all exist. It was only in 2 crafts. It is the mother of pearl inlay and the tile work that we had to really revive the craft, which had been lost to India. Okay, that's it.
I just had one last quick question. Or I don't know. Should I? Okay, I'm gonna go. So I noticed on like the partnerships, you have a lot of government agencies and stuff like that. So I was just wondering how like the changing government and like changing values of the government affects like the city and local municipality like relations and partnerships. Like, does it make it a lot more difficult? Like, how do you like prove that like the work you're doing is valuable, especially under like all this new politics?
You're too young to worry about those sort of things.
I took class.
I think for you, the takeaway is that it's possible to do these, and I'm hoping you young people will do much more than this. But India has got this, the British invented bureaucracy, and we took it to the next level. So it's really the bureaucracy. It doesn't matter, and the political change doesn't really matter to that extent. But bureaucrats change periodically. So quite apart from the engagement with the community, we had a similar number of meetings every year with the leadership of our partner agencies, hundreds of meetings. There is no shortcut to that. You had?
Did you still have one?
You had a question.
Last one.
Thank you. One was in part answered. I wonder how often do you have to renegotiate things at a
Every day.
In fact, yeah.
Every day.
And the question was about the pigments used whenever you do the painting work. What kind of materials do you use? Do you try to, sort of replicate?
This is for the art restoration?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to answer that. We used a conservator called Anupam Shah on that building, but I wouldn't know the pigments and so on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure. Thank you for having me.